I'm not anti-capitalism. Theoretically, there's nothing wrong with capitalism in the religion. Islam doesn't object to capitalism per se. There's nothing wrong with it. But there is something wrong in the religion. There is something wrong in Islam with exploitation, with manipulation, with greed, with the hoarding of wealth, with driving people into poverty and debt. There's something wrong with savaging the environment for the sake of money. There's something wrong with subordinating the state to the will of business. There's something wrong with the creation of drastic, unsustainable income disparity in the society. I'm anti all of that. I'm against all of that. So if you think that that makes me anti-capitalist, then you are insisting that capitalism must include all of those negative traits, that it must include all of those predatory, psychopathic tendencies. I don't think that that's necessarily the case. It's a little bit like when I criticize the abuses and the injustice of the West, that's interpreted as me being anti-West. It's as if you are implying that the West must include those abuses and that injustice, that it's impossible for the West not to be abusive and unjust. So the same thing, when I'm criticizing the abuses of capitalism, it's like you're saying that capitalism must include those abuses. I don't think that that's necessarily the case. I'm against capitalist extremism, which is what we have now. I mean, neoliberalism is a correct interpretation and implementation of capitalism in the same way that the belief system of the Khawarij was a correct understanding and implementation of Islam. It's extremist. And I don't see why anyone should be expected to not recognize and acknowledge and identify it as extremist, and expect it to be moderated to some degree, at least to the extent to which it's less harmful to the society. I mean, look, business is the single most influential element in the society, let's be honest. We spend most of our time at work, as I've said many times. This is how we provide for our families. It determines our standard of living, it determines our quality of life, it determines where we can afford to live, the quality of the education that we can provide for our children. It determines our access to the most basic things in life. And that's a sector of society that is strictly authoritarian in nature, the way it's managed. And it demands the freedom, business demands the freedom to do anything and everything it wants for the sake of delivering profits to a handful of executives and shareholders, regardless of how that impacts the community, how that impacts the broader society, how that impacts the environment, how that impacts the country as a whole. So upholding the right to have a business, and then saying that you can have business, you can have companies, you can have corporations, but they shouldn't be regulated, and government should have nothing to do with what business does. It's like saying that a man can own a ferocious lion, and he is not to be expected to keep that lion in a cage, or to keep it on a leash, or to keep it controlled in any way whatsoever, simply because he does have the right to own it after all. And if you expect him to keep it under control and to keep it from terrorizing the neighborhood, that's putting a restriction on his freedom to have a pet. I'm sorry, but the rights of business, the rights of companies, the rights of corporations should not supersede the rights of the population, should not supersede the rights and the safety and the welfare of the public. That doesn't make any sense. And when you have a system that makes it that way, when you have a system that upholds the supremacy of business, the supremacy of corporations, the supremacy of companies, over and above the rights and the welfare and the protections and the safety of the population, that's a failed society, that's a failed civilization, that's a failed culture. And you're minimizing the importance of your own people. But you do nothing but show contempt for their safety, you show nothing but contempt for their welfare, you show nothing but contempt for their security. You show nothing but contempt for their quality of life, while showing nothing but reverence for corporations, showing nothing but reverence for business. So that shows what your culture really is, that shows what your civilization really prioritizes. And it's time that the people themselves recognize this, and recognize that they live in a culture, they live in a civilization that holds them in contempt.